Hey, hello and welcome to this really fun tutorial by Flomotion. Because today I'm going to show you how to make it rain. And I'm also going to show you how to create a thunderstorm. So why don't you just follow me into After Effects.
But before we start, let me tell you two things. First, as always, if you have any question about this tutorial or about After Effects or visual effects in general, then just leave me a comment down below and I promise I will answer all of your questions. Hey, and second, for this specific tutorial I used some really cool stock elements from a page called Action VFX, and I've actually worked with them before in my professional career, for example on this shot here. And believe me or not, there are actually 36 different assets within that shot. And over here on their page, you can see that they have everything from explosions to shattering glass to storm clouds. And this is exactly what I used. Hey, and I'm also going to leave the link to Action VFX down below in the comments. And if you use that link to purchase something, you will also support my channel. So that really helps. But just two more things about Action VFX. At first, once I reached out to them, they were so nice, super friendly and super helpful. And second, you can not only purchase bundles on their page, but also individual clips, which makes it super handy if you just need one clip for one specific shot. And hey, if you take a look over here, you see that they also have a lot of free stuff to offer. So just check out the awesome stuff that's going on their page. But now back to the tutorial. So what is today's tutorial actually about? We're going to create this rainy storm scene, but there's actually no effect called rainy storm within After Effects. So it's a lot of different effects that make up this illusion. So we are going to create the weather lights, then I'm going to create the hero element, which is the storm cloud and the lightning strike. And then third, we are going to add some rain on top of all of this. And to finish it, we are also going to create raindrops on the lens. So let's get this thing started.
So let's start with part 1, which is the weather lights. So let's quickly bring out the footage that I've shot for this and let's analyze it. So I have a small light mounted to the camera so that you can see my face when I'm close, and obviously it's getting dark, and I was lucky enough to have some clouds in the shot already, but as you see, there is no thunderstorm, no lighting, nothing. And in my tutorial I quickly rotoed out myself with a luma key, and then I had the lightning and the clouds behind myself and also a layer of rain behind myself and one on top to give it more depth. But I don't want to focus too much on the rotoscoping because this is a pretty intense tutorial as we are dealing with 4 different parts. So I'm just skipping to the end here where we just see the last few seconds. Hit B for beginning, and the end I can leave like it is. Click on it and trim it to the work area. In that way we only have to deal with that. And to keep it organized, let's go to composition settings, and the start time code is 0. And also just make sure that you are in 32-bit, and you can set that over here. Go to 32 bits per channel, and this is because we want to deal with very dark material and footage and with super bright elements like the lightning. So we really want to get most out of this, and many of the effects we are going to use will work best in 32-bit. Okay, perfect. This looks pretty still at the moment, but you can see when I scrub through this real quick, the clouds are moving and there's also something going on the streets down here, but really nothing special because we want to add the special part to it. In those first few minutes of the tutorial, I'm going to concentrate on the weather lights. In this case, Action VFX just has some pretty amazing storm clouds. And when I play this, you see it's real clouds with lights added to it. So I'm going to use those storm cloud assets to spice up everything here. So let's just drag and drop it into the composition, and I'm going to scale it down a little bit, and let's just hide it. Because what is it that we want to do? So when watching some references of real weather lights, you can directly see that the light that is interacting with the cloud normally comes from within or behind the clouds, so that the dark parts of the clouds are not as much affected as the light part of the clouds. And let me quickly show you that by simply adding a new solid, a red solid, and we call this red clouds. Hit OK. And now I'm duplicating the footage, and we call this dark parts, because those are the dark parts of the clouds. And I basically want to get rid of everything that is brighter than the really dark parts of the clouds. And I can do that with a luma key, because in that way I can key out luma values. So let's bring out a luma key to the dark parts, and you can key out the darker parts, but I actually want to key out the brighter parts. And when I click on that, it directly keys out everything. So we have to set this up. And let's just play with the threshold here. And you see now the darkest parts come in, and slowly some parts of the clouds come in. And those are really the darkest parts of the clouds here. And let's also feather this a little bit. And this really depends on your clouds that you have filmed. And I'm just feathering them so that we don't see any noise in there. And something like 8 or 9 looks just about right. And let's quickly also create the shape of a cloud. And for a comic cloud, you can do that with the ellipse tool and just draw a few shapes. So all in all, we have like a cloud and feather all of this. So this is still just for you to understand what we are doing. So we have the original footage, we have a cloud that has a lighting, and then we put the dark parts on top. And you can directly see that this is kind of the effect that we want to achieve. Okay, now let's bring out the real footage. And this is the storm cloud. And let's hide the dark parts for now. And I'm simply going to position this. Let's quickly scrub through this and see where the cloud is lighting up. And around here, I can click on that layer and set a marker by hitting the multiply or the star sign on the numpad. And I'm also going to squeeze this a little bit so it fits better into that position. And now all I'm going to do is to play with the different blending modes. And something like a color dodge, or maybe the classic or the normal color dodge, is really up to you. You could also try stuff like add or maybe screen, but the color dodge really works perfect. And now I'm also going to add the dark parts on top. Let's just position this. And let's play this back, what we have. And now let's simply duplicate that a few times and just position it to fill up all the parts that you want to lighten up. And I can also apply a camera lens blur to the clouds because they are a little bit too sharp at the moment. So something like 10, and I'm just copying this to the other clouds. Looks just fine. And if some of them is maybe too bright for you, like this one, you can also bring out a levels effect, bring it onto that storm cloud and just get rid of some of the bright parts. So simply slide down with the white. And you see, and let's maybe add one more over here, maybe scale this one down and bring it behind this dark cloud over here. Okay, and last but not least, we have to offset all of those in time a little bit so that they don't all flicker at the same time. And you see that this really looks super realistic. And we're only at the first step of this tutorial. So you could still play with the dark parts, use 2 different versions and stack them on top of each other with different opacities. So that should really look pretty nice. So a last step for this one. Let's take a look at where the sky is illuminating, maybe at that point in time over here. So I'm duplicating the footage once again. And now I'm calling this highlight. And solo this and create a quick mask only around the city. And I'm going to bring up the exposure slider here so that you can just see it a little bit better. And basically this is what I want to do. I want to flicker all of this while the sky is illuminating. But as you see, some of the parts are brighter, and this is basically the rooftops, and all the parts that are illuminated by the sky at the moment, those are also the parts that should get brighter when the sky is illuminating even more. So what I mean by that, I want to create a mask so that not all of this is getting bright and dark exactly the same. Therefore, I'm going to once again use a luma matte, or maybe let's do a different method now and use an extract effect. But you could also use a luma matte. Basically, we want to separate the dark parts from the highlights. What you can see here is from black to white, we only have values in that area. So let's just slide it over, and now we can feather this here. Let's also feather the mask. Okay, and unsolo this. And now those are our highlights. And we bring out an exposure effect. Drag it onto the highlights. And in that way, we can do the same like in our exposure slider. This slider here makes the whole image brighter. And if we now take the exposure on just the highlights, you see, this looks like there's really something going on, because now we only illuminate the city. You see, like for example, the trees in the foreground and the field, they don't get brighter. And this is exactly what this would look. So set it back to 0. And maybe I'm also adjusting the mask to one side. So you have different masks for different parts of the illumination. And here we get some glow in the clouds. So let's bring up the exposure to like 1. But let's quickly reset it, because you can also go into the individual colors. And now let's only bring up the blue exposure. And you see what this is doing. It lights up everything that is only in the highlights and lights it up in a blue tint. Really cool. So let's set a keyframe, and then we go back where the clouds are basically off. Set this to 0 and to 0. And we can simply define that area and maybe feather this a little more. Maybe even bring it up to 2 just for your viewing purposes. Because as I told you, this is maybe not realistic, but it's just better for you to understand the effect. And once you're doing that, you can decide if you want to go down with the effect or leave it like it is. So this is one of the highlights. I can now duplicate it, so the whole layer, and now I look out for maybe that highlight over here. So I'm simply dragging the mask to that side and also take the keyframes over there. And now this cloud is illuminating the middle part. So let's have a look on what we have created so far. So let me quickly go through this, because I'm actually just doing the same over and over again. And I'm also doing one in the back here for that cloud. And as a last step, what I'm going to do, let's again look out for one of those bigger clouds, maybe over here, set a marker so that I can find it later on. I'm adding a new adjustment layer by hitting Ctrl-Alt-Y, or going to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and apply a glow effect to it. And with the threshold, I'm now searching until only the parts that I want to illuminate are catching the glow. So this is somewhat around here. So there's all the bright parts get a glow, which is really nice. And now I'm bringing up the intensity, but wait a minute. So I'm bringing this up really high, because now I can increase the radius and you will see what this is doing. So let's just bring it really, really up, like to 5 or even 600, because now we see this cloud is illuminating all of that area. But obviously that's too strong. So now we can bring down the glow intensity. So I just brought this up so you can see the area that is affected. So let's maybe just bring it to 1. When I turn this on and off, you see that we now have a halo around the cloud and in the atmosphere. And hey, that glow will also pick up the other lights, like this one. I can turn it on and off, and this is just the glow. So this is what we have created in the first part. You see all the lights flickering in a really realistic way. And we also have the ground plane, or our footage, interacting to the lights. Let me call this the glow, and let me apply a color correction to it just for your viewing purposes. I'm just adding more contrast to this so you can see better what we are doing. Obviously this is too much, but this is just to watch it better. So I can set this layer by right-clicking on it to a guide layer. And in that way, it will not render, and you see it by that sign. So this is just to see it while we're working on it. So let's directly jump to the next part, creating our hero, the lightning bolt. And therefore we use again the storm cloud assets from Action VFX, but this time we use it as a hero. So we really put it in the center of the shot now. And what I like about Action VFX, you can again go to their site onto the products page, and now I'm going to the storm clouds, and here I get a preview when I'm simply hovering over the shots, and I can directly see if an asset fits for what I want to do. So really handy and a perfect workflow for me. I decided to use this wispy storm cloud. When I scrub through this, you can see what this is doing. So let's drag and drop this into a new composition, and on the composition settings, let's call this our hero. Hit OK. And now let's again scrub through this and see where it lights up. And about here, I'm setting a marker again. When you purchase those clouds, you're not just getting the cloud, but also a PNG file that you can on one hand use as a Luma matte. So now you actually have a real alpha channel, and I can bring it down here again. So now I see the cloud all the time. Maybe I set the footage to add. Now it lightens up even more. And by the way, you could simply duplicate that, and in that way it gets more and more intense. So we have created our hero. So let's just drag and drop our hero into our composition. And I want to place it somewhere around here. And now all I have to do is to color correct it. And therefore I'm using a levels effect. Now we simply go to the point in time where it should light up. And remember, we set a marker. And now let's just play with the sliders to make this look realistic. So you see, we can get rid of a lot of the white tones in here and also go into the different color tones. And something like this looks fine, but we also have to blur it a little bit. So let's add a camera lens blur. And maybe our dark parts are still a bit too dark. So let's go into the RGB and let's get rid of some of the black tones. And you can also play with the transparency of that to blend it in a bit more. So really up to you. So now we have our hero element, because the lightning strike should come out of here. So this is with and without, and this looks just so realistic. That's perfect. But hey, let's bring this a step further. Before we even add the main lightning, let's add something to the weather lights. So what I'm trying to do is create like a hint of the lightning already before it starts. So let's quickly create a new layer by hitting Ctrl Y, or layer, new solid. Let's make this one bright blue. That doesn't really matter. I'm just doing that so I can later on find it way more easy and call this our hint. And we apply the advanced lighting to this. And now in here, we want to change a few things. So you can directly see that you could play with all of this. And remember, it's beneath the glow, so it already interacts with our scene. But let's actually make this a strike, because in that way we can work on the beginning and on the end of our lighting. And I actually want to animate the conductive state. So you see, when we animate this, it is in motion all the time. So let's quickly set a keyframe, bring this back to 0, and at the end I'm just bringing this up. And when we play this back, you see something is happening. Okay, perfect. And you could play with all those settings here, as well as our glow settings. But actually I want to have the glow radius pretty low. And now what I want to do, I can just solo our hero together with the hint. And I'm animating it so that we have something of the lightning already in the cloud. So now let's set a keyframe for the origin and the direction. Here our cloud is the brightest. So let's maybe also set this to add or screen. Just to see it better, I'm increasing the glow radius. And let's bring this in here. And let's just make the radius smaller, as well as the core opacity. So it just shimmers through the clouds. And now I'm going back a frame and animate it so that the bright parts of the cloud have like a source. And here nothing happens, so let's just trim our layer. So it just starts here and goes back down. And let's bring that to the endpoint. And now you can really just play with your forking so you get more and more detail. And for that, I would recommend you to bring down the glow radius and the glow opacity. And now you can really add more detail to all of this. And now let's just play with the transparency to really make this a subtle effect. And again, you can now just duplicate that layer. And you see over here, it also gets bright. And I'm just clicking on the whole layer and just position it over here. And again, we add a camera lens blur to it because it's a little bit in the background. And our hero also gets a camera lens blur. And actually this is full resolution. And let me quickly go through this and add a few more of those. Okay, you see I quickly just copied and pasted around a bunch of those elements, and now you see that we also have some flashes going on behind the clouds, and obviously we have our hero element over here. Perfect. So this is without the hero, this is with our hero, and this is with the lightning inside the hero. So, and as a last step for our lightning, of course, we have to add our lightning strike, and therefore again I use an element from Action VFX. And actually this is a free element, so you can download all of the lightning strikes for free on their page. Let's solo this and look for the point in time where it's visible the most, and I'm aligning this to our marker, and I'm adding this to our brightest part in here, and I can also mask this out. So now we have imported that, but we still need to integrate it because it needs to be super bright. And we do that with an exposure effect and actually bring it beneath the glow again, so this will interact with it. And now I want to make this brighter as it is, and at the moment obviously it's completely white, and I set this to full resolution here. And if I would bring up the exposure, it would get brighter and brighter, and you see it can't get brighter than white. But as we are in 32-bit, the glow reacts because it sees that we are almost 10 times whiter than white. So that's great, and that's really a cool thing about 32-bit. So if we go back to, let's say, 16-bit, nothing is happening because it's just white and nothing on top. So back in 32-bit, let's reset this and not just make it overall more white, but go into the individual channels, because now we can really play with this. So let's bring up a little of the green exposure so that we just get a tint of green in here and also a lot of blue. This is our lightning strike with no exposure, just a white stroke, and this is with the blue applied. And maybe also let's add a little bit of glow to this. And I'm actually adding that before the exposure. We can go all the way up to 100 because 100 means it picks all white values. And the radius, let's also bring that up just a little bit. Okay, so let's watch this. So obviously we still have to tweak this a little bit. And there are actually two things that I want to show you. The first thing is the exposure, because this is just so bright that I'm going to add a new adjustment layer, call it strike exposure, and bring out another exposure and just bring it up. Maybe just like so, and also beneath the glow, so it will catch also that. Set a keyframe, and again we're going to animate this over time. So here it starts, so let's bring this back to 0 and bring it back to 0. So this is what we have so far. And on that frame, let's also really quick animate our highlight layer that we have done before. So therefore let's duplicate this one, hit U to see its properties, and I'm going to delete the mask. Let's quickly mask out the part where our lightning is closest to the floor, which is around here. And of course we feather this. So before we close the second chapter, I'm simply going to duplicate the lightning that we have created like a few times and simply shrink it down a lot and randomly place it in the background and offset them. So we just have a few of those lightning hits. And now I'm going to render this version out. So back in here, what I have done is I have already imported the rendering. So let's pre-compose all of this by selecting all of this, going to Layer, Pre-compose, call this our scene, hit OK. And now I bring the render on top, because in that way it will just work a little bit faster, but you could still do the exact same thing with the scene here. I'm just going on with the movie file now, because now we are going to create the rain. And the reason why we just start creating the rain as soon as we have the background is pretty easy. And you will see that in just a minute. So at the effect and presets, I'm typing in rain. And there we have the effect CC rainfall. And I'm bringing that on the footage. And this will create rain. So let's actually duplicate it. Get rid of the rain for this. This is our background scene. And this is our rain. And if we solo the rain, we don't want to composite it with the original. So let's disable this. Now we only see the rain. And I'm making this really big at the moment, so just for you that you can see it better, because you have a cool setting at the background reflection. Bring that to 100%. You now see that the background is shimmering through this, so you can also somehow guess where the lightning is happening, because that is flashing up. And this is really cool, because we want to see some of this interaction in the rain. Now, while the rain is still that big, let's have a look at the settings. So the drops are pretty obvious. You can animate them from 0 to something like 3000, and then they will slowly start and the rain will slowly start. The size, we will work on that in a few seconds, and the scene depth is really important. So when we bring that up, you basically see that we get smaller parts in the background and larger parts in the front. So we create some depth. And this is exactly what we want. So in my example, I even created 2 different layers of rain. So one with a small size and one with a big size, and both of them with a decreased scene depth. And I'm going down with the scale and up with the drops. Okay, and maybe they could be a little bit faster. And let's also add our scene here, because now you can see what is happening. So this is what we somehow have, and you can directly see that this is just too much. But why is that too much? So think of the situation when you look outside the window and you think, hey, is it raining at the moment? And you can't really see it. And then you say, hey, I can hear the raindrops on the window, so it must be raining. And this is exactly what we're trying to achieve here. We want to feel the rain, but not really see it. So at first, let's bring down the size and also the influence just a little bit, really just a little bit. And then we go down with the opacity. And I'm just getting rid of the animation on the raindrops. That will just make it a little bit more easy for us to see, because the rain always stays the same. Okay, so this is somehow the default. And now let's randomize this a little bit more. So for example, we can bring up the wind, and that will push it in one direction. And now as we have something done to the wind, we can add a variation to the wind. And I'm bringing this up to 100. So in that way, some of them fly to the side and some of them fly down more straight. But again, as I told you, the rain should hardly be visible. So I'm even bringing this transparency down a little bit more. Now we are only at 2%. I'm not even sure if you can see that on the recording right now, but we will fine tweak that. Because now we have created that feeling that something is going on in the background, but you can really hardly tell if it's raining. And when you look outside the window when it's raining, you can actually just see the raindrops, which are small water particles when something is reflecting in them. So when some highlights pick up, for example, when the lightning is going on, or when you have a light source, then the raindrops pick some highlights. So, and this is exactly what we want to do. So let's duplicate our rain and call this one the rain highlights. And now let's add a levels effect to it and make this one really shiny. But now all the rain has highlights. So all of this is super bright. So I want to randomly cut out some parts so that just a few of those spots are always highlighted or catch some light. And I will do that with a fractal noise layer. So stick with me. I'm calling this the fractal noise. Hit OK and apply a fractal noise. OK, because later on I want to use the luma values. So in other words, wherever this layer is black, I see the highlight, and wherever the layer is white, I don't see the highlights. Okay, so we can work on the contrast as well as the brightness here. And you could also try the different variations here. Something like this just looks fine. I can use that as a luma matte already, or in this case an inverted luma matte. And you can see now just some of the rain parts are white. And we can play a bit more with this. For example, you can go into the transform settings and scale this. So maybe we make the rain even brighter, so just that we see it better here. And now we can tweak the scale settings. Now we really have some parts of the rain that get some highlights, like over here, but at the moment it's always on the same spot. And when you play this, you can see that this looks a bit odd because all the raindrops get their highlights at the same spot, like for example over here. That is strange. So let's work a little bit more on this matte that we have. So at the moment, wherever it is black, you see a highlight. And this is super easy. When we animate this evolution here, you see that everything is moving. And that's exactly what we're going to do. And as this is a pretty short amount of animation, let's just click on the stopwatch, go to the end, and simply drag this up. And let's play this to see how fast this goes. Maybe we just give it like 8 circles. And I can't tell you if that's right. You have to watch it. And you see now some of the parts flicker. And this looks just right. Now the rain is just too obvious at the moment. And we have it at 2% opacity. But let's bring this whole layer opacity down. And remember, the rain even gets brighter when the lightning strike hits, because it's interactive with the background as we have applied the rainfall to our rendered clip. So I'm trying to zoom in here and render this one in full resolution, just a few seconds. So you can see this is now the rain that is going on. So as I told you, what I have done in my composition is I have simply duplicated all of this. So this is going to be a foreground element. So let's bring down the scene depth really to a minimum, and I'm soloing just those. Also decrease the drops and make them bigger. And for those, I'm adding a camera lens blur because they are pretty close to the camera. And the same for the rain, so I'm copying this onto the rain. So in this front one, I bring down the transparency even more because remember, I can't tell you that enough. 20 different effects with 5% only make up 100% of an effect, if that makes sense. So the third part of this really complex tutorial is done. So up to the last step, creating the drops on the lens. And really quickly, my thoughts on that. Normally, when you are on a professional shoot, you would of course take care that no water hits the lens. So normally a professional shot would not need that. But I was recently watching a few new Hollywood movies and a bunch of new trailers with some water shots, and I saw that they also added some of those in post. And this is basically because you don't want to get your camera wet or your lens because they are really expensive. So all of this needs to be taken care of in post-production. So let's do this. For that, I'm adding another render on top of this. And again, you could use your original composition, but that's simply a little bit quicker, and I'm soloing this. Because the raindrops, they are really special. And that's an effect. I'm pretty sure most of you haven't even heard of that effect, and it's called Mr. Mercury, and it's a simulation. So let's drop it onto our render, and let's just play this. And this is what this does. It simulates like a, I don't even know what that is, like a metal paste or any sort of liquid. But you see all the highlights and reflections. So that's actually something that we can work with. And you can also see, when I bring this to full resolution, that the whole scene is visible in those drops. So you can see the city lights in here. And this is exactly what water drops on a lens are doing. All of those small drops react like a small camera lens. So think of those drops as small fisheye lenses all over your lens. So at first, let's increase the radius, because at the moment all the particles or drops come out of this middle point. But when we increase the radius to, let's say, 100 in each direction, you can see this is what happens now. Okay, so for the velocity, let's bring that to 0. And the longevity, let's make this like 5 seconds because our composition is 4 seconds long, so the first ones will stay for the whole time. Gravity, let's bring that to 0 because at the moment, you see what's happening, we have a little bit of gravity, so they all fall down. So let's bring this to 0, and the birth rate, bring this down a little bit. So now you see what is happening. It looks like the drops on the lens start really small, so out of nothing, and get bigger over time. And we don't want that. We want them to appear at a frame and then stay there. So we can change that with our influence map. And what we want to do here is we want to have constant blobs. And when I play this, you see they plop onto the screen and then they stay there, they just get bigger. And this is because at the moment when they were born, so when they start to appear, they have this size, and when they die, they are bigger. So let's just make them exactly the same size for start and for the end. Perfect. So with the birth rate, you can now define how many particles you want to have, and also with the radius, because the same amount of particles just get spread wider out in the X and Y, so therefore you see less in the middle. Really, if you take a close look, you can see in each of those small bubbles, you see the whole scene. Perfect. Okay, so now maybe it's time to unsolo this and to see it in the context. So you could go into the light and shading and change the light direction if you would have like a direct light source. And as we don't have that, we can go into the shading and bring the specular down. At the moment, all those raindrops are completely visible, but that's not the case when they are on a real lens, because they are as close as possible to the lens, so they should be as much out of focus as possible. So therefore, let's add in a camera lens blur. You see, now you can hardly see them, but in combination with the whole shot, you see that it's raining onto the lens. And a last step before we close this whole thing is what normally happens when you have water on your lens. It works like a prism. So it separates the RGB channels from each other, and you would get a chromatic aberration. And there are many ways of creating a chromatic aberration, but let's just go with one version that works pretty good. So therefore I'm disabling the camera lens blur once again and search for the VR chromatic aberration effect, and this creates a chromatic aberration, and normally this is meant to be for VR, so for a 360-degree image. So this is absolutely nonsense physically what we're doing here, but it will sell the effect, because later on the camera lens blur will help out really a lot. So what this is doing, it separates the three colors, red, green and blue, and you can define the offset. So now I'm just bringing down the red a little bit so it's closer together, and the same with the blue. And when I bring the camera lens blur behind it and add this, now you can see what this is doing. This is what a lens would look like. Maybe let's still bring this down more, like -2, something like this. But you can see what this is doing. This is what a raindrop would look like on a lens, and this is without. So you just get this extra layer of detail. And whoa, we are done. So this was really a long and intense tutorial. So I really hope you learned something about the 20 different effects that I showed you. So how to integrate real stock footage onto a scene that you have shot, and how to fine tweak that and bring it a step further with details, 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 and details. So all of this is really subtle, but I think in combination this will make up for a really awesome and great shot. And if you made it until the end of this tutorial, hey, why don't you give me a comment on how you liked it, or maybe you just like it, or even better, why don't you just subscribe to my channel, because in that way I can do way more of those tutorials for you, and I really love doing those. But for now, I wish you a lot of fun creating a thunderstorm in After Effects.